Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're kicking off Alien Invasion Month 2.0, and we're starting with our global gonzo entry of Xtro. We'll get to that in just a minute, but first, our call to action this week is to let everybody know that if you are one of the awesome people that is a Patreon premium subscriber at patreon.com/genrevision, you have a little treat that Travis posted recently. We're not going to say what it is.
It's not something huge, but it is something fun. You can go see it at patreon.com/genrevision.
Yes, if you become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month, you'll be able to see this little tease of what we're going to be doing. And you can also get access to all of our awesome bonus material, which are weekly pre-show episodes, extended currently consumings every month, and a whole bunch of other stuff connected to all the other Genrevision shows. So that's patreon.com/genrevision. All right, we're kicking off a new theme month. Well, it's actually our second take on a theme month that we did before about Alien Invasion. And we're doing a global gonzo entry, which, for anybody who doesn't know, our global gonzo entries are when we try and find international cinema that is pretty wild and out there. And I think we have a good entrant this week with Xtro from 1982. This is directed by Harry Bromley Davenport. He is also one of the writers, along with some quite a slew of other writers, and some not too often seen credits on the writing, which I think one of them is additional dialogue.
Yeah, that one's not used too much in live action anymore. Like the first two screenwriting credits you see are, I forget exactly which two guys it is, but then after that, there's based on a screenplay by Harry Bromley Davenport and his writing partner at the time, which is like, okay, you wouldn't see that credit now. That's not handled the same way. So it sounds like Xtro was conceived by Bromley Davenport and another one of the guys, and then they handed it off to two other writers who then did more work on the script, which is commonly still done today, but it wouldn't be handled the same way in terms of credit. Regardless, this was something that was snapped up by Bob Shea at New Line Cinema. New Line was very, very young at this stage. This was 1982. You can definitely feel Shea's kind of influence. Bob Shea, like any other sort of genre producer, Corman, guys like that, have a certain sort of hucksterism about them, and to be able to sell a movie as sort of like strange or extreme is always a good thing for them. And Xtro is pretty strange right off the bat. You get your little brief credit sequence, which features music composed by the writer-director, Harry Bromley Davenport. But then the weird starts with a bang.
Literally, in which our two lead characters, well, I should say our I can't really say lead because there is no real lead in this movie, and we might talk about that. But there's a father and a son playing, and the mom is somewhere. And our father is Sam. The son is Tony. Sam throws a stick, which I think they're playing catch with, or they're tossing to a dog. That doesn't matter. What matters is that Sam throws the stick up into the sky, and it freezes, and then explodes into a giant ball of light.
Yes, and when the giant ball of light goes away, what happens is it's instantly nighttime. Something is blotting out the entirety of the sky, and there's like a catastrophic storm that suddenly sweeps down, and before you can say Xtro, Sam is just gone. Cut to some amount of time later.
I think they say Sam has been gone for 3 years. He just disappeared. The mother, Rachel, is under the belief that he just ran away from home.
Right. Well, he just went to go get a pack of smokes and never came back. So they're trying to move on. Rachel is dating this guy, Joe, who kind of looks like a twink Tim Burton. He's a fashion photographer and says weird shit like, imagine your foot is a face, now smile. Okay.
Word.
Yeah. I mean, if that's certainly a thing that you can say. So they're trying to find how their home life is going to work with this kid who, doesn't really connect with this boyfriend. He's a live-in boyfriend, and, he even does stuff like early on in the movie, he walks on them making love. It's a little awkward. They also have this young woman living with them. She is from France. Her name is Annalise. She's not all that important to the plot of the movie, maybe in the third act a bit, but she's basically a lodger / nanny for young Tony.
This is the setup. Don't worry, this doesn't last very long because cut to an alien appearing.
Oh, there's this lovely shot that was, clearly done optically.
Oh, yes.
Where you see this big sort of British rolling hills landscape. And then on the distance, you see some light, playing across the horizon. So there's some sort of UFO zipping in from, God knows where. And it deposits something in the woods. And there's this really weird, almost Hellraiser-esque sequence where we see some sort of alien creature pulling itself up out of a puddle in the forest. Like at night, there's like an alien basically growing out of the wet forest floor. It's only a couple shots, but it makes an impression.
Well, and I think this is something, especially in the early stage of this movie, that I want to commend Xtro for, is when this movie decides it really wants to be creepy and off-putting, I think it nails it every single time. And this opening in which this goopy being starts rising up, you're like, what is this? Like, I don't know exactly what I'm seeing. Cut to this couple that are driving down this country road in the middle of the night, and there is a shot of this creature. We see it eventually come out of the ground, and it's a wonderful effect where clearly they have this mime performer that the costume is basically the body of an alien, but they are kind of basically like crab walking, but they put the head on the alien backwards.
Right. So the face of the alien is actually on the back of the performer's head, and the performer is sort of on all fours with their chest facing the sky. So it's a really odd looking thing. I mean, look at it for a minute and you'll be able to see what's going on. But to break up the human silhouette in that way and to immediately make all the joints sort of turn the wrong way is really disturbing looking. And this couple is driving down this dark country road, and they see it in front of them on the left side of the road. And that brief flash of it from the driver's POV as it moves by, and then you see as the car approaches, the alien makes some sort of sudden movement, and it's really fucking creepy. I mean, it really does look like an actual piece of like you said, cryptid footage.
It's wonderfully strange. It sets up a genuinely eerie, spooky idea to like, what is this creature? What's going on? Well, this creature kills this couple by shooting its tongue out into their eye. Well, it shoots the tongue out into the eyes of the guy, and then just kind of grabs the woman by the arm and then cut away, and then we don't see what happens to her.
Right. Yeah. The method with which it kills the dude is so strange. Like there are these two sort of ribbony things that shoot out under the guy's eyes. We find him later, and he has these sort of like really nasty gashes on his cheeks under his eyelids. And it's like, God, that's so strange and so specific. And this is a theme that runs throughout the entire movie. It's just full of weird, specific details where you're like, somebody thought that was cool and interesting, and the only reason it's in the movie is because they thought it was cool and interesting.
Well, and that they've really felt that it was effective in conveying whatever they were trying to convey. And again, I think that is almost across the board true in Xtro. Like in terms of creating effects and concepts that feel alien or strange or off-putting or creepy, I think it works every time. I'm going to say it. Like, I don't think there's a moment where in that approach, the movie doesn't work.
Well, I mean, sometimes the movie is just flat out silly, but I also don't think it's trying not to be silly. When it has those moments of outright silliness that we'll talk about later, it's like, I think the movie seems fairly confident and fairly aware that what it's doing is kind of goofy. But it's doing it with a level of confidence where you're like, okay, I think this movie might know what it's doing. It doesn't seem inept in that way.
Right.
And so I'm not able to kind of appreciate it ironically. I think my appreciation of it, even when it's doing something that I think is goofy or funny, is like, okay, this is sincere.
So after this, Tony, the kid, wakes up in his bed and is covered in blood. And he says something to the effect of like, it was all sticky.
Yeah. Well, it's like, Daddy was here. I saw Daddy or something like that. Meanwhile, this alien is stalking this neighbor. There's some like blonde-haired woman nearby. I don't know if we actually learn her name or not.
Nope.
But this is a really effective like creature stalking sequence. We know it gets in her house, but we don't see how. And like just that fact alone is really creepy.
Right. Well, we see kind of a POV shot of it looking at the house, approaching it. We hear its creepy breathing. Then it slides into the frame on the right side of frame. And we're kind of behind its head as it's looking at her. And she's, I think, like getting the dog to come in or in a window or something. And then, then we cut to the inside of the house and she's clearly like, something's weird. The dog won't eat its food. I think I hear some noises. She turns off the lights in her house. And then all of a sudden there is just this red light that fills the room that I think is supposed to be
in the fireplace.
Scene. Yeah, in the scene coming from the fireplace. But there's no way any place has ever looked like that particular lighting, but I don't care because it sets the mood perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the few really atmospheric sort of creature horror scenes in the film because after the first act, after the setup is done, Xtro kind of abandons that model of horror, which is kind of strange for an alien monster movie. Anyway, the attack on this woman is one of Xtro's sort of signature moments, and it's playing on things that are instantly familiar. It's sort of horror that you might see in Alien, the violation of the body with tentacles and teeth and, rubbery appendages. Species does this, Andrzej Zulawski's The Possession. It's all there. This woman is attacked by this alien critter, and there's this weird appendage that seems to come out of its neck and puts itself on her mouth, and she wakes up the next morning to find the remains of this alien creature, which again is like the size of a dude, sort of rotting away in her living room, and her fucking dog is eating it. Ugh.
It's so good.
So disgusting.
Xtro knows it's being gross. It's reveling in it, and I think all of its grossness is, again, 100% effective because, yes, seeing this dog lick up this husk of whatever this creature was is gross, and you're like, man, that's really gross. What could happen next?
So blonde woman gets up and stumbles into her kitchen where she is immediately stricken with labor pains because she has to give birth to a full-grown man.
So here's the thing. This moment, I can't believe it happens this early in the movie, but I think it has to because this is a walkout moment if there's ever been one.
You could call it a mission statement. You could call it a walkout moment. Whatever it is the movie going there.
I mean, this woman's stomach inflates to abnormal size. There is a shot. This is almost grosser than the concept of her giving birth to a full-grown man.
Sure.
There's a shot. It's basically that we kind of see the side of her leg and her thigh, but in between her legs, which is not visible to us, there is just bloody goop
gushing out of her. It's so horrifying. But the guy's head actually like stretching the abdomen appliance out, and you seeing it tearing and stuff like that. Like, it is horrifying.
Yes, it is legitimately I mean, you will never see anything like it ever again. And of course, just to add a little bit more grossness, as he's crawling out, he grabs his umbilical cord and bites through it, just to add that little, salting the flavor of the grossness that is the Xtro birthing scene.
Yeah. And when this full-grown man finally gets up off the ground, we see that it is none other than Sam, the dad who disappeared at the beginning of the movie.
Yes, he has apparently been reborn. It's like he must have been whatever this alien creature was, and now he has retaken this form, and he is going to come back into Tony and Rachel's life and try and make things normal again. Now, he purports that he doesn't remember what happened to him. He doesn't know where he's been. His intentions seem dubious at best because we know he's a creepy alien demon that was birthed out of a woman. We know that. Rachel and Tony don't know that. But there's sort of this cat and mouse thing that's going on where Sam isn't going to reveal himself just yet. He's got to go take care of the couple that he killed on the road. And all this while, we're also getting to learn more about Tony and Rachel's kind of day-to-day life. They live in this apartment complex. One of their neighbors is this very kind of annoying, nosy German woman.
Yep. Tony owns a snake.
Tony owns a snake named Harry. Harry is apparently female because Harry has laid eggs.
Yep.
And Tony also has a lot of toys.
Yeah, Tony is an imaginative kid with a big toy collection. Kind of a quiet kid. The kid actor they got to play him, it's not a bad performance, but like most of what the kid is expected to do is to sort of stare in wonder and or menace.
Well, and I also think a lot of his dialogue was dubbed.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I didn't get the impression that it was like really, really bad ADR by like an older kid actor. You know, something that we saw in Beyond the Door, for instance. It's not like that. Never stuck out to me as bad.
Yeah, if anything, I think sometimes he sounds younger than he's supposed to, at least for that actor's age. So yes, eventually Sam has reintegrated himself into their life, and this is when it's clear that he has some designs on Tony.
Yeah, this whole section of the movie is, you know, like any other section of this movie, littered with bizarre details. So, you know, as the newly rebirthed Sam is, you know, starting to reintroduce himself to his prior family, he picks up a payphone and calls them and is only able to get out a couple of words before the telephone melts in his hand. It's a really strange moment that requires no explanation. It's just something that clearly the people making this movie thought was cool.
Well, I said to you when we were screening it that this is the kind of nightmare logic that I really like.
Sure.
Where and this is, I mean, because we haven't really talked about the filmmaking a whole lot yet about Xtro, and I want to mention the editing of this because I think it's a crucial part of both what makes Xtro work and is potentially works against it. Is that scenes just end in Xtro. There is no real sense of natural flow between transitions when it comes to scenes. It is just, in a way, Xtro is kind of a stack of scenes movie.
Right.
But every single one of those scenes in that stack is very, very well crafted and engaging and bizarre. And they all kind of work in spite of each other.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a really plot light film. You know, we know that this alien man who thinks he's the father, maybe he is the father, we don't know. We know something is going to go wrong eventually because he's working his way into this family's life. And we just don't know what's going to happen or when, because the movie isn't really trying to telegraph or foretell exactly what's going on. There's no foreshadowing of like, okay, this is the character who we think is going to be the plucky heroine, or, you know, there's no character that is like man with gun to solve alien monster problem. Like that character in this movie doesn't really exist.
Right. I said to you, there is no secret government scientist with a folder.
Right.
In this.
Who is the protagonist even in this movie? Like, sure, the mom gets quite a bit of like perspective scenes in the film where like we're following her perspective, but all the other characters get perspective scenes, even if they're not terribly important. You know, like the French lodger that lives with Rachel and Joe. She gets perspective scenes with her boyfriend where like he's eating her out and stuff like that. Hey, at least he goes down. Yeah, the movie doesn't really care about what you expect from traditional popular film structure, where there is a clearly defined hero or, you know, clearly defined villain. Like the movie leaves you sort of adrift in its structureless form.
Yeah, and I think that frees it up to be as weird as it wants, and it commits to all of that stuff so commendably. But at the same time, there are moments pretty early on in Xtro where there's no bizarre, crazy shit going on, and we're going to get to the bizarre, crazy shit. But there are moments where it's like, okay, it is just Rachel and Joe sitting in bed kind of talking about how she feels about Sam potentially being back, and Joe arguing like, look, he left you and all this. It's not that the attempt isn't there. It's that, like you're saying, the structure isn't in place to properly emphasize those moments.
Sure. I mean, it's like the basic algebra of movie watching. It's like, well, we have to solve for X here. We know there is a solution, and we're being told, like, okay, these are the things that you're having to work with. Try to put it together and solve for X. Like, that's what a standard movie plot sort of is. But this is just kind of like, here's this random assortment of data that doesn't really seem to have much of a discernible pattern to it. It just feels kind of chaotic, but not in a way that's like manic. Like, it's not throwing stuff at you really quick. It's not that kind of chaos. This is just sort of like formless. I told you, I was like, Drew, I have seen this movie before a long time ago. As I sit here today, I cannot tell you how it ends. And it's not just because I couldn't remember. It's just like the movie doesn't really give you enough to kind of let you figure it out, or even let you build up expectations as to what's going to happen. It gives you no expectations.
Well, and everything that happens in the movie only adds to this aura of anything can happen, because anything does happen in Xtro.
No shit.
As Sam begins to exhibit stranger and stranger behavior to the audience, not to Tony and Rachel, like we see things like he will turn on the gas, I think, near the fireplace and just leans down and starts huffing on the pipe for the gas, or he'll grab the eggs out of Harry's tank and just squishes them and eats them. So gross.
Yeah, and the kid catches him doing this. And so Tony runs away and goes outside, and the alien dad comes and finds him and tries to comfort him. But just when we think things are going to get weird, they actually get way weirder than we could have anticipated, because alien dad leans down and kisses his son's bare shoulder. And when he kisses his son's bare shoulder, he actually is implanting something inside him, because we see this like cyst bubble up on the kid's shoulder, and we're like, ugh.
Which to talk about the effects for a second, there are wonderful, simple air bladder effects in this movie, and this is one of them, where it's just this very, very kind of almost crude air bladder effect, but good Lord, is it gag-inducingly gross.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's real nasty. And yes, this is a low budget production from 1982, and it was, kind of outside the Hollywood model, like all, British crew, British actors, didn't really have that kind of Hollywood money, but then the effects are never not totally accomplishing what they're going for. Even when they're a little bit low budget, like there's an appliance later on somebody's abdomen where you're like, well, there's no belly button. What's going on? But it's still really effective.
Well, I think it's a matter of style over kind of their quality. There's a style to the effects in Xtro, whether they were intended or not, that I think really work. For example, when we see what I guess you could call the UFO or the ship, it is just this triangle of light.
Sure.
And it's cool. Like, it's super simple, but man, is it leaves an impression. And the same thing with these more kind of body effects, is it's like, yeah, they may not be the most complicated, even for the time. I mean, this came out in 1982. This is the year of John Carpenter's The Thing. But Xtro is committing to these effects and is committed to showing them off.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that Harry Bromley Davenport, the director, had a vision. I wouldn't describe him as what we call a visionary director.
No.
Because if you've seen the other Xtro movies that he made, it's like, well, okay, this guy's clearly not a visionary. But
that's mean, but you're right.
He's a better synth composer than he is a director of sequels.
That's true.
Let's say that. Score
to Xtro is pretty fucking great.
Right. It's of a particular kind of synth music in that it's a little dweeby, but I'm not against that at all. So, I'm not trying to say that Harry Davenport, Bromley Davenport directed this movie poorly. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm thinking that this is a pretty great execution of a clear intention. And that's to like totally weird people out and to make them feel like anything could happen. Like suddenly the movie turns into like an alien child's fantasy, or there's like a power fantasy for a young kid. Shortly after alien dad implants Tony with the little shoulder bump, he starts to develop powers. The kid develops powers. Like the snake, Harry, slips out of the tank and goes into a hole in the wall and ends up falling through the floor into the salad of the lady downstairs. And so the lady takes her meat mallet and pounds the snake to death. And she comes upstairs with the mushed remains of the snake in a Ziploc bag, and she goes, "It appeared in my supper."
And earlier, when we first were introduced to her in the hallway, and she was kind of being like overly maternal to Tony, like, "Oh, aren't you so cute?" Like pinching his cheeks or something. Tony had this little toy soldier, and he pointed it at her and pretended to shoot her.
Mm-hmm.
And after Harry is killed, Tony's sitting in his bedroom. He's looking at his toys. There's this toy of a little clown. And this is where the movie just punches you in the fucking face with weird. If you thought the movie could not get weirder than a woman birthing a full-grown man, get ready, folks, because we've got Dwarf Clown.
So, well, I mean, is Dwarf Clown the first? Yeah, Dwarf Clown's the first thing. So,
Yes.
This kid is in his bedroom at night, and he's awakening to his new alien psychic powers. And he's looking at his toys. He's got this top, this like big top that like spins and plays a tune, and it's spinning and spinning and spinning, and poof! Suddenly, this young man with dwarfism appears in clown makeup, giant fucking shoes, and
He's got like a top hat, a coat, everything.
Sure, I mean like a top hat that's as tall as he is. I mean, it's crazy. And he has this yo-yo, and he's throwing this yo-yo around, and you're like, okay, the movie has gone completely to Cuckoo Town at this point. It's a very loud clown too. Like there's a lot of noise, a lot of music,
honking, and he holds the yo-yo up into the camera, and it's spinning in his hand like it's some weird hypnotism thing.
Yeah,
and then he's throwing the yo-yo around. All of a sudden, we realize there are blades in the yo-yo.
Yeah, there's like saw teeth on the edges of the yo-yo, and it's like shredding books and shit. And you're like, what the fuck is going on? And then we realize that, oh, this manifestation is real because the noise that it's making, other people are experiencing it. And the lady downstairs starts banging on her ceiling with the broom handle, like, tell that dwarf clown to shut the fuck up.
Rachel comes in and tells Tony, like, if I hear another peep out of you, I'm going to be very angry.
If I hear another dwarf clown making all sorts of claptrap in here, I'm going to beat you senseless.
So, she goes away. Then, being reminded of the mean old lady that killed Harry, Tony manifests another one of his toys, which is the toy soldier he had earlier. And there's some noise coming out. The old German lady hears it at her door, and she's like, what's going on? And I think she opens up the door to look out.
Yeah.
And it looks like there's nothing but pure darkness behind her door, which is, she lives in this apartment complex. There should be like the staircase and everything that we've seen earlier, but instead there is just pitch blackness. And in this moment, the chain on her door, the chain lock, a like pair of bolt cutters just appears and snips the chain suddenly.
Yeah, and then disappears back through the hole, and she like slams the door, and it's like, oh fuck. And just that shot of the bolt cutters coming through the door and just snipping the chain is like, I mean, it's like, it's perfect home invasion horror. Really scary. And it's not done in any sort of like, really slow close up and of the woman fighting some force that's that's on the other side of the door. It's just like, whoop, snip, and it disappears, and you're like, oh fuck, this is not going to be good.
There's not even like a musical sting or anything. It's
not
just
a jump scare. Yeah.
And then the door swings open, and a life-size version of the toy soldier has appeared. Now, the toy soldier and the monster at the beginning that was in the road, these are played by two mimes who go by the names of Tick and Tock. They apparently were in Return of the Jedi, and that was one of the things that really kind of catapulted them to, I guess, whatever the equivalent of, like, whatever mime fame is. They're famous mimes. And the toy soldier comes through, and the performance, I believe this is by Tick, is so good.
Yeah. Oh, the movement, the sort of robotic movement that he does, it feels distinctly sort of toyetic. It doesn't feel like he's doing a robot dance.
No, it feels like a toy. It's extreme. I mean, the costume in of itself, with this very, plastic toy looking face, is creepy in of itself. But it is the movement from that performer that turns this into like, yeah, this is a monster. Like, it's silly and this is wacky, but this is also genuinely unnerving.
Right. And again, that feeling of like anything could happen is totally present throughout this entire sequence, because we started this movie thinking it was going to be an alien invasion film, and, it would have a scary sex alien monster, so we kind of have a solid idea of what movies like that are. We've seen Species, we've seen Alien, we kind of get it. But when the movie starts pulling stuff out like, oh, here's a person with dwarfism dressed as a clown with a bladed yo-yo, here's a melting telephone, here's a massive toy soldier that is manifesting in this woman's home, and like it's not just like a figment of her imagination that this kid is inflicting. Like, this thing is real. It stabs her with its bayonet and kills her.
So the thing is that during this stretch of the movie, the creature horror stuff does really get background. It is more now about Tony's powers and his manifestations and his relationship to his dad, because now they are starting to understand each other. Sam is saying stuff to Tony about like, oh, he's where he came from. He says something to the effect of Annalise, the nanny, would be perfect for something we don't know yet. Eventually, Annalise is I don't remember exactly how she gets knocked out.
Oh, the dwarf hits her with his big rubber hammer.
Oh, that's right.
I'm not joking. Like, the clown character has this like hammer that's really bendy, and he just whacks her in the head with it.
Then they drag her up to a room, and Sam does another one of his kisses, this time on her stomach. And the effect that they do for this, in which he's kissing her, and then there's kind of this the camera's set kind of above her torso, looking down on his head as he's kissing her. These blue veins start to just run throughout her stomach in this little air bladder effect. It is awesome.
Yeah, I think the way they did this is they actually had those bladders in the appliance filled with some really dark blue fluid that would actually show through the latex or silicone. I mean, the effect of it is like so creepy. And the fact that this kid is like sitting there, like, sucking on her gut. It's like, whoa, this is so uncomfortable.
Oh, that's right. I misspoke. It's not Sam. It's Tony who does this.
Yeah.
Which is already it's like, ooh, dad kissing the shoulder. I mean, even if there wasn't an alien gross out effect to that's already kind of like, that's kind of weird and creepy. But now you have this little kid kissing the torso of an adult woman, and it's like, what is going on in this movie beyond the weird alien stuff? But then you put the weird alien stuff on top of it, and it just gets nuttier.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of the vein effects of Scanners. In the climax of Scanners, when Michael Ironside, has all the veins in his face. But this is really like the only point in the movie that feels like there is something going to happen for a third act, because before the alien kid and the alien dad are in cahoots and they agree on doing something with this young French woman, the movie sort of feels oddly sustainable. It's like a weird, unfunny sitcom that could just go on and on and on. With alien dad being a weirdo and alien kid being weird, and, photographer boyfriend being distant and strange and having quirks, and the mom just sort of being vaguely concerned about everybody involved. It's like, this can just go on and on and on like this. And, strange things keep happening, but it doesn't really feel like it's adding up to anything in this equation until, the alien dad and the alien kid now have a plan to do something with this French woman. So we see they knock her out with the clown, big floppy hammer. They inject something into her abdomen via the kid's mouth. And then I believe the family all goes out to their cottage in the country, like where this all started.
Yes. Well, I think this is when it's not it's just Rachel and Sam go out there.
Right. And they're kind of reigniting their relationship a little bit.
Yes, exactly. And this is during this whole time, there's stuff where this is when the stuff with Annalise is happening. And then Joe, who has just been kind of pushed to the sideline, starts to put together that the couple that was killed in the at the beginning of the movie in the car, that Sam had something to do with that. And so the things are starting to come together. Tony ends up going over to where Joe's place is, and they're going to drive him out to the countryside, to their old country home. And things are about to go down because Sam is starting to deteriorate.
Yeah, this whole alien, in a human's body thing, birthed from some poor rando in the countryside. Like, evidently that's not terribly sustainable. There is a reproductive life cycle to these beings, because we see in the bathroom back in their apartment in the city, the French nanny character, the blonde lady, sort of like cocooned up into a corner of the shower. And at the bottom of the cocoon, there's like a funnel spout at the bottom that's just pumping out little eggs that are basically water balloons.
Oh, and I don't remember exactly where this happens, but because it's one of the only other deaths in the movie that we should say, is that there's a neighbor that Rachel calls, I think when she's out in the countryside with Sam, and she asks him to check on Tony and Annalise. And it's bizarre, like this guy just has a picture of Stalin in his place.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's so strange. Yeah, and he makes complaints about, like, when he's on an elevator, the elevator light goes out and he's like, damn foreign light bulbs. It's like,
yeah,
who
so
is
I guess
this weirdo?
Yeah, he has a picture of Stalin, and he seems to be a little xenophobic. And he basically just exists so that Chekhov's razor yo-yo finally gets utilized.
Right.
Which I'm not complaining about. Like, razor yo, the clown tosses the yo-yo and the razors come out and slits his throat open. Nice little practical gag. Boom. Yay. Razor yo-yo got used. I'm happy. So back to this climax in which everybody's going to the countryside. I don't remember what happens to Joe,
the photographer guy.
Yeah.
There's another woman early on in the movie who gets kind of gutted by the alien monster. Turns out she was a model that Joe had photographed, and he compares her photo in the newspaper, reporting on her death, with a photo that he's taken of her, and says, oh my God, I think that Sam has killed this woman.
Yes.
And so he grabs Tony and puts him in the car, and we're like, okay, at this point, we know that Tony is going to, like, sick the toy soldier on this guy or something.
Yes. Does he get killed? There's no context to what I'm saying at this, but it's like, he's not the one that gets killed by the Panther. It's Annalise's boyfriend that get killed. That there's this whole thing where there's this, like, toy tank going around in the hallway.
It's funny. That dude eats pussy. The pussy eats him.
Hey, look at that. It's poetic.
Maybe.
So, yes, I mean, there's this whole thing where this, like, toy tank is chasing this boyfriend of Annalise and shooting real live explosive rounds at him. You're like, oh, he's going to get cornered and the tank's going to shoot him. He turns a corner, and out of literally nowhere, there's just like a black jaguar or panther or something, and it kills him.
Yeah.
It's great. That's the kind of attitude this movie has, whereas, like, literally you cannot predict what's going to happen, because you could have paused the movie a second before that happened. Like, all right, what's going to happen to this guy? And you never would have guessed Panther.
At this point, the movie had thrown so much unexpected shit at me. I was just like, I was looking at the running time and I was like, okay, there's 13 minutes left in this movie. What the fuck's going to happen? Is God going to drop an anvil on this movie and then, like, smash cut to credits? Like, I mean, it builds you up to this point where you're just like, this thing, it hasn't just gone off the rails. It doesn't think of rails as a concept. It's
right,
just,
yeah.
it's so doing its own thing and, like, blazing its own path. It's having a lot of fun doing that, I think. So Tony the kid and Joe the photographer man drive out to this country cottage. Let's see. The alien dad and Rachel are banging in bed in this cottage, and he's dissolving.
Yeah, he's starting, and she realizes something's wrong with him. There's, like, big scratches and stuff all over his body and face that are, like, they're black and yellow and red, like all these weird things. He's clearly starting to deteriorate. I remember what happens to Joe now. So when they get there, Sam eventually takes Tony and is taking him out into the woods. Joe is chasing him. Sam turns around, and now he's got, like, some fang appliances in his mouth, and he looks kind of almost dirty. He's like, even more kind of falling apart. And somehow he, I don't know, psychically kills Joe because Joe grabs his head and blood starts gushing out of his ears. He dies.
Yep. Dies by alien scream, I guess.
Yes, that's what it was. He was screaming.
Alien Dad has fallen apart to the point where his whole human skin is gone, and we see the sort of skeletal form of the alien standing there with the now like infected alien child. Rachel has chased them out into like a clearing, and then a huge beam of Close Encounters of the Third Kind light shines down from the sky. Alien Dad and Alien Kid are enveloped in the light, and just as I sort of thought would happen, like they're just going to disappear and the movie would be over. I was just like, yeah, that's, bizarrely, I thought like the movie would just sort of decide that it didn't want to have any more runtime and just end. It does that. And then I was like, oh, wait, there is sort of like one alien invasion element that we've forgotten about, and that's the eggs. Like, I wonder if the movie's going to go back. And yeah, that's the final scene, is the mom going back to the apartment in the city and seeing the eggs.
And it's a very dreamlike sequence. Again, like
she sees the jaguar.
Yeah, we see the jaguar in this all white hallway. She opens the door and there's just this, the way it's lit and everything. It almost seems like a dream, but the whole movie is a dream.
Yeah, well, the hallway is like this overexposed, white, blown out, like nowhere space. Mm-hmm. And she makes her way to the bathroom and sees the eggs sort of sitting in the bathtub, implanted in what looks like green porridge. And she picks one up and the egg is pulsing. It's clear that they used water balloons or condoms to kind of make the eggs. And there's something inside that's boom, 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 boom.
Still gross to the very end.
Very gross close up. And you can see like, this is the sort of level where it's like, yeah, the mechanism of the effect is really cool and like viscerally disgusting. But like the red veins that are painted on the condom are like clearly hand painted. But those sort of hand-painted aspects actually show, I think, a loving devotion to the craft of these effects. Even if you can see the seams, I kind of love the seams.
It becomes a style in of its own, and one that was surely not intended, but they just were doing what they thought was the best thing they could do with the time and the equipment that they had, and it endears it to me in that way. Of course, the egg has to explode. A tentacle that resembles the tentacle that impregnated the poor rando lady at the beginning latches onto Rachel's mouth. The door to this room slams shut. Movie's over. Now, we do have to mention, in regards to the ending, there are like 4 alternate endings to this movie.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one that matters, and that's the actual ending that we get.
It is, but I think it speaks to your point about the movie not really knowing what it was building towards.
Right. So when Bob Shea took this movie and was actually going to exhibit it for the first time, he's like, well, I don't like the ending that's been provided to me. And the ending originally was Rachel going home to the apartment back in the city, and there being a whole bunch of little Tonys running around in there, and they all come up and hug her. And Shea didn't like that ending. So instead, what he did when he first hosted a screening of the movie is he basically chopped that ending off, and the movie ends with Rachel in the field, just having witnessed her alien family disappear.
Which is where you thought it was going to end.
Right. And I was kind of like, well, I just think this movie's going to be over at a certain point and not really deliver a traditional ending, because it hasn't really cared about traditional story beats thus far. But Harry Bromley Davenport went back and thought, okay, well, I don't like what Bob Shea has done for his version of that ending. I'm going to do one that's going to come back to what people liked about the sort of opening of the film. And it's a goopy creature feature, and will end on a goopy creature beat that basically apes what people love about Alien. And that ending works just fine. I'm totally okay with it.
Yeah. So I love Xtro because I love movies that commit to their own particular vision of insanity. And I think as an effects monster film, especially a low budget effects monster film, it's successful in that. And that the film, because there are movies, I'm going to say a movie, and if this is a deeper cut, but if people like this movie and they're going to feel bad that I feel this way about it, I'm sorry. But there's this movie called The Deadly Spawn. And I'd always heard, it's like, oh man, it's this cult, crazy, super gory, you got to see this movie, The Deadly Spawn. And finally saw it, and I was like, okay, I get it. Like it feels kind of like a homebrew horror production, and I get why people would like this, but I don't think the filmmaking in that movie is up to par with the kind of crazy, ultra gory alien effects that they're doing. And the big thing that I had always known about was like, oh, there's this one gag where the alien bites somebody in the face and just tears the fuck off of their face. Oh. It's like, oh, okay, so it's a very gory movie, but it's also like very, very low budget, truly independently made gore effects and stuff. And there was always kind of a, I'm sure people saw it when they were way too young and that it was very endearing to them. Now, that's fine. Like, I have movies that I'm that way about too. But the thing is with Xtro, the effects filmmaking and just the general filmmaking are on par with each other. Like, they're good. I don't think Xtro is like an amazingly directed film or like a particularly super stylish one, but it's not without style.
Sure. Like I said, there is a vision, and whether, I've asked, does the movie execute this vision, this sort of apparent vision? I think it does. But the weird thing about Xtro and why I think it's so unique and why I think it merits recommendation is that it's not really abiding by familiar goals. It's not setting out goalposts that you're familiar with. And it's like, okay, well, we have to have a character that's like this, or we have to have a scene that does this, or establishes that plot point. It's like, yeah, you'll see stuff in Xtro that is kind of reminiscent of other films or other more popular films. But man, when you mash up all the things in Xtro in the order that Xtro does it in, and like the mood that it manages to capture by doing so, there's nothing like Xtro.
Yeah, I would say that there are very, very, very few stock scenes in Xtro.
Yeah, it's marching to the beat of its own drum. And like I said, not only is it off the rails, it doesn't really believe in rails.
Yes, I was going to say that's like kind of a very Matrixy comment of yours, like there are no rails. Well, if there are no rails, then there are no rules. If there are no rules, then why don't we just do this?
It's like, it's the kind of madness you normally see with like amateur films.
It doesn't feel like, one guy made this movie at his grandma's house.
Sure.
Over a summer or something. This is a production.
Yeah.
And I think it achieves those goals as the production it wants to be. Just conceptually, it's going to have things you've never seen in a movie before. And that alone, I think, makes it a winner, in the global gonzo category. Now, talking about it as the kickoff to Alien Invasion Month 2.0. Now, there is a lot about Xtro that I think is so ripe for exploration when it comes to allegory and metaphor. This idea that the paternal member of your family disappears and returns and has changed somehow, and probably not for the better. And that change is going to have influence over the son in the family, and how does the mom feel about that, and what's going on. All of that is there in Xtro, but Xtro really is not tuned into that or interested in it. Instead, it's interested in being this wild, crazy horror fantasy.
Are there themes in Xtro? Absolutely. But it's not terribly concerned with the thematic implications of what it's doing. It's not really constructed to make a big thematic statement at all. Whereas you look at movies like Insidious Chapter 2 and Poltergeist 2, for instance, both scary dad movies. And one of the big themes in Insidious Chapter 2 is, how are our parents raising our boys? Because, you have scary dad, having an effect on the boys at home. And then you have the villain story, which is about like how his mom raised him poorly and he grew up to be the bride in black ghost. Mm-hmm. Spoilers if you haven't seen Insidious Chapter 2, but I actually recommend you skip it. It's pretty bad. Then in Poltergeist 2, you have, Craig T. Nelson's character possessed by some other foreign force, and, drinking all the tequila and being a real asshole and, saying horrible shit to his wife. And, these themes are more heavily delivered on in movies like that. And Xtro has whiffs of it every now and again. But again, it's more committed to just doing whatever the fuck it feels like.
Right. And as that applies to Alien Invasion stuff, I think there are reads of Xtro that you could manifest, an appropriate word.
Yeah. An invader, an interloper. This guy feels like an interloper in his own family, kind of, if you can describe him as that after he's been aliened.
Well, the idea that women are primarily at the brunt of the violence in Xtro.
Sure.
Like there are more women, you know, the woman that he has to kill to be birthed from, the neighbor lady, Annalise herself. But I don't know if Xtro was really the best thing to kick off Alien Invasion Month 2.0, because I don't get a strong feeling that it's using the idea of alien invasion to say something directly.
Right. It's not out here to make big thematic statements. It's not a didactic film. It's mostly just concerned with doing what Xtro does best, and that's just being fucking weird.
Which is great. And I think we'll talk about similar things about this when we head on over to the shelf. So as far as final thoughts on Xtro, we do recommend it.
Sure.
It's an absolute blast of a movie. You will have never seen anything quite like it. It is extremely well made for what it is.
That sounds almost a little bit reductive. I think it's a really singular movie. And if you like movies like this, you should absolutely see it. You know, I think you owe it to yourself to have fun with it.
Well, then let me clarify. I say it's extremely well made for what it is because I have seen slews of just absolute waves of movies, particularly from this era, in this like kind of early to mid 80s era when the effects boom was really going on and everybody was making alien ripoffs.
Yeah.
A lot of those movies they might have some fun effects stuff, but filmmaking wise, performance wise, scripting wise, they're not that great. Like, they're pretty forgettable. There's nothing forgettable about Xtro.
The clown with the giant shoes and the bladed yo-yo and the floppy rubber hammer. Like, if I forget that, like, there's a problem with me.
Well, you did apparently from seeing this one time before, and then when you were just like, "What is this?"
Yeah, I think that was a time in my life where I was smoking pot.
That's possible. But so Xtro, I've seen countless movies that are on Xtro's same kind of tier level, and I can't think of another one in its peer group that excels at what it's trying to do as much as Xtro does.
Agreed.
An absolute recommend if you think you can stomach watching a woman give birth to a full-grown man. But let's head to the shelf where we pick movies that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And as always, we recommend you, loyal listeners, go to genrevision.com, comment on the post for this episode with your shelf picks, and we'll feature them on next week's episode. Travis, what are you pulling off the shelf for Xtro?
This is another movie that came to us from Britain in 1988. It was directed by Bernard Rose, who you might know as the director of Candyman. This is a story about a little girl whose fantasies and dreams, specifically her fever dreams, seem to come to life. And, she goes to sort of a fantasy place that is really alarming. It's kind of reminiscent of Neil Gaiman's stories. It's actually based on a story by Catherine Storr called Marianne Dreams. But, one of the things that happens in the movie is like her father is kind of mostly absent and spoken about in some really odd ways. And they hint at some things, but then like that manifests itself later on in the fantasy sequences of the movie. And it's difficult to describe it as a children's film because eventually where it goes is, I think, a little headier than what most children's films would do and scarier, certainly. I mean, there is a confrontation between the, I guess, fantasy villain of the film and the lead actress that is like really chilling and quite scary. I highly recommend Paper House.
Paper House. Okay. I didn't catch if you said the name of it or not. So yeah, Paper House, which I think I had as a shelf pick for when we did Coraline, I think.
Yeah, sounds right. And I watched this at your recommendation.
Yes. And it's definitely one that I think is still way more underseen than it should be. Definitely one to seek out. Well, I'm doing something that we don't often do on here, although I think you did it actually recently, now that I say that. And I'm doing what I guess you could call an anti-shelf pick, because it's not a movie I necessarily recommend seeing.
Does pair with the movie we talk about, though. It
does pair. Well, because my immediate instinct is just to tell people that you need to see Species 2, because I'll take any opportunity to tell people that they need to see the absolute just trashterpiece that is Species 2. Because it's, aliens go up, come down. There's a guy that's trying to impregnate women with alien seed and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Species 2 could have been it, but I decided to watch a movie for this show because when we were talking about it during our screening, we both had this serendipitous moment of like, this kind of reminds me of this movie. And this is The Astronaut's Wife from 1999, considered one of the banner years in film. The Astronaut's Wife came out and was pretty much universally panned and disliked. And I'm always interested in these kind of movies because I'm like, well,
why?
yeah, like what's going on here? And so I watched The Astronaut's Wife. This is written and directed by Rand Ravitch, who I believe has gone on to do a lot of TV writing, wrote the screenplay for the Candyman sequel, Farewell to the Flesh.
Acho and Rand Ravitch.
Yep. This... Oh, boy. So, God, you threw me with that. This is the only feature directing credit that they have. It's just, it's a story about... Are you still on Reddit?
Racho ran Randy Ravish.
Oh shit, now you're getting me going.
Oh man. That's one of the...
Oh no. Oh no, I'm sorry, everyone. Oh, now I might have the hiccups.
Astronaut's Wife.
Oh. You can't, dude.
I'm sorry. I promise I'm done.
It's okay. It's okay. It's great. It's whoo. So The Astronaut's Wife. Johnny Depp's an astronaut, goes up into space, comes back. He's changed and he's trying to get his wife, played by Charlize Theron, pregnant. This movie is exceptionally directed and shot. I don't have his name up, but it is shot by the cinematographer who shot E.T. and Empire of the Sun. It is a really, really polished looking movie. It's engaging on a filmmaking level. But the reason I'm doing it for my shelf pick for Xtro is that where Xtro completely commits, almost to its detriment, to its gonzo genre elements, The Astronaut's Wife seems to want to do everything it can to distance itself from anything that could be genre elements. This is the same year that we got The Sixth Sense, and I feel like it's, I don't think consciously, because who knows about when it was in production, but it feels like it's trying to be in that same mold of like, this is going to be a serious supernatural movie. But The Sixth Sense knew like you had to have crazy, scary, memorable ghost moments.
Mm-hmm.
The Astronaut's Wife is just a lot of like, look, we all know there's something up with Johnny Depp, the whole movie. We're not really seeing anything that's abundantly genre weird. And this is already a very pretty, just a sci-fi riff on Rosemary's Baby. But even in Rosemary's Baby, Satan showed up for the impregnation scene.
That he did.
Yes. So there was like Rosemary's Baby was still not afraid to go full genre to make an impression. And is, I think, extremely well directed as the Astronaut's Wife is. It is the most boring execution of this kind of story you could do. And that's a shame, especially to Charlize Theron, she never doesn't kill it. And she's doing great work in the movie, but it's great work for nothing.
Yeah.
And so I'm really disappointed that like remake these kinds of movies because there is great thematic stuff in The Astronaut's Wife. There's ideas about female autonomy. There's the idea of repressing trauma in a toxic way because Johnny Depp won't talk about what happened to him while he was up in space. Now, granted, that's also because, he's possessed by an alien, but that feeds into their relationship dynamic and what's kind of driving them apart. There's all sorts of really, really rich thematic stuff in The Astronaut's Wife, but you just don't give a shit because it is so boring. And like we said, Xtro is never boring.
The funny thing about it's sort of like floating mood, you know, where it sort of floats from one scene to another without any sort of really propulsive plot throughout a big chunk of it. Like, I think that can easily cross over into boring for some people. But if you're on board for its particular brand of wackiness, again, we recommend you watch Xtro instead of The Astronaut's Wife.
But yeah, no question there. But we do have our shelf picks from last week's episode on True Lies versus Hard Target, which I'll admit, I didn't think we were going to get this many responses. So thank you so much. And especially to see so many people be on board with our take of Hard Target was very heartwarming.
Hell yeah.
So Jetpack Jesus had for Hard Target 2, which is streaming on Prime because it has Scott Adkins in it. Might watch it. I don't know. I do like Scott Adkins. And for True Lies, Jetpack Jesus went with Mr. and Mrs. Smith just because it takes the conceit of one spouse lying to the other about being a secret agent to the next level by having both spouses lying to each other about being secret agents. Eric Fuchs' shelf pick, he did not want to do anything that could replace Hard Target because, as he says, it kicks fucking ass. We agree, Eric. He decided to replace True Lies with The Living Daylights, one of his all-time favorite Bond movies. Living Daylights is pretty darn good.
Never seen it, but I will.
JT's shelf picks were The Abyss, because it's also sandwiched between two bigger successes from James Cameron, Alien and T2, but is a movie that JT definitely recalls holding up well. And also, he says, if True Lies is a bloated, not very successful remake of a French film, how about 12 Monkeys, an expanded but never unwieldy remake of a French film? Which I've never seen the original French short of that. I should probably do that sometime.
La Jetée, I think I saw it, but I don't remember it.
Mr. Milksteak had 2 shelf picks. Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, and Action Jackson. The 1-2 punch of Fred Ward and Carl Weathers was too much for me to resist back then, and I watched and rewatched these 2 at a time when I should have been outside playing sports or something. 2 movies I have also never seen, which I'm going to have to add to the list, Mr. Milksteak. And finally, T-Bones McRonoke said, shelf pick Commando, a super silly action movie that knows it's super silly with great villain performances. As for True Lies, forget the shelf, stick it in the drawer. Which I really liked. Go listen to our Commando episode. That's one of my favorites as far as our take on it. How much fun we have with it. We love Commando. So thank you everybody for your shelf picks. Love getting them every week and looking forward to next week's. Let's do some currently consuming. Nom, 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 nom. Travis, what's been on your plate?
We got a request from Patreon subscriber Ian, who wanted us to talk about the movie Vivarium. And while we won't do a whole episode on it, I am going to talk about it this week because it's been on my plate. So Vivarium stars Jesse Eisenberg and Imogen Poots, sort of coming back together after their really, really fantastic work in
The Art of Self-Defense.
The Art of Self-Defense, thank you. And Vivarium is a very British film, and you know that it has that sort of English sensibility to it. Imogen Poots is the lead in this one, even though, like, if you look at all the marketing material for this movie in the US, Jesse Eisenberg is top billed, so his face is real big on the poster. But he's not the lead. He plays second fiddle to Imogen Poots, and they play a young couple. She's a school teacher. He's like a gardener, arborist, you know, works with trees and gardens and that kind of stuff. And they want to get married. They want to start a family. They want to move to a nice house. And one day after she finishes work, they go to like a realty office and they meet with this guy who's like, okay, well, I have this new development that I'd like to take you to, and we'll show you a house there. They go to the development. The guy that's taking them out there is super weird. So something is immediately off. And they tour the house. It's fine. It's kind of cookie cutter. Every house looks the same. They go to leave, and the guy who took them there disappears. And then they find that they're unable to get out of the neighborhood. And I won't spoil what happens next, but the rest of the movie contains some really strange Twilight Zone stuff that happens. And it's utterly nerve-shredding. It's not like a super, super scary horror movie, but it's definitely a social horror movie that talks a lot about parenting and talks a lot about the sort of, you know, suburban artificiality that, you know, that we've defined as like a goal in our lives. It is definitely very sharp-toothed as a satire. And there's some stuff that happens in this movie that I just found so anxiety-inducing. And not because it's a horror movie that's trying to like really go for the jugular, but there's some stuff in this flick where you're just like, oh my God, I just want it to end. I mean, it's so awful for what's happening to these characters. So Vivarium is really well put together, and it has some really cool stylistic stuff going on. And it also has a sense of humor. I wish it actually exercised that sense of humor a bit more frequently than it does. But, you know, those few moments of humor that sort of poke through are pretty fun. It's definitely a darker humor. The movie was directed by a guy named Lorcan Finnegan, and he also has a story credit as well. The rest of the writing was done by somebody named Garrett Shanley, and I don't think I'd seen anything from either of them before. But if Vivarium is any indication, I think they've got something, you know, pretty smart going on. But I find it hard to recommend just because I found the movie like so bleak and like I said, just anxiety inducing. Like I had to take a good long walk after this. I was like, this made me feel terrible.
Okay. I mean, I'm intrigued. It sounds like the kind of fantastical genre premise that I like. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the bleakness, it's very good knowing that going in, just how rough it can get. Well, on my plate, I decided to watch an anime film, and I guess I should preface by saying, like, I think I am of intermediate knowledge and kind of appreciation when it comes to anime, but I'm not somebody who really deeply identifies with anime as far as like a particular art form or
You're not an otaku, Drew?
Yes, I am not an otaku. But I've seen a lot, and I look at it more so as just somebody who absolutely loves animation. And I just think a lot of anime doesn't do anything interesting animation-wise for me, and what I like about animation.
So many of these anime shows are churned out by like factories, basically.
Right, so they just can't, and you know, there's other things that people care about with anime that doesn't really have to do with the animation, and that's fine. It's just not what I care about. But there was a movie that I was keeping my eye on. It's called Promare. This is from director Hiroyuki Imaishi, and I know him because he directed. It's not even a feature, really. It's under an hour long. This movie back in 2004 called Dead Leaves, and the art style in Dead Leaves is like, this is not what you think of when you think anime. And the way that the animation is used and the kineticism of the action and everything that's going on is not what you think of when you think of kind of standard anime stuff. And I've always kind of kept an eye on him because he's worked on stuff like End of Evangelion in the animation department and stuff. I believe he was one of the lead animators on that. And Promare was this thing. It's like, yeah, I've seen it around, and ever since all of anime went to being digital and all animation went digital and nobody uses cell animation anymore, I think so much digital animation looks really boring to me.
It's too clean.
It's too clean. Well, Promare is an absolute assault, and the actual story is very basic. It's a sci-fi world where there are these mutants that have this kind of pyrokinetic ability. They're called Burnish, and the government that crops up around them eventually is, you know, trying to round them all up and imprison them. And there's a terrorist cell of Burnish that are called the Mad Burnish that are, you know, trying to free themselves and all this kind of stuff. And then the protagonist hero is part of a rescue squad of firefighters who specifically put out Burnish fires, because I won't spoil it, but the fire that the Burnish use isn't really fire as we know it. The animation style of this gets to kind of a core of what interested me in anime when I was younger, because when we were growing up, anime had a very, very different place in the pop culture discussion than where it eventually went. And that I always looked at anime as a forum that was about extremes, that was both extreme in animation and style and extreme in content. Whether that was sexuality or violence, or not necessarily, you know, quote mature content. If it was going to be something science fiction, it was going to be the wildest, craziest, most sci-fi thing you'd ever seen.
Yeah, it was going to be nigh unintelligible. It was going to be subversive. I remember, there was a finale, a Revolutionary Girl Utena finale movie or something like that, and I had somebody try to describe it to me once, and I was just like, you got to stop, because this is just not making sense.
Yeah, and that I'm not going to try and sit here and explain the plot of Promare, because if you watch it, you'll get it. It's not nonsensical. It tells the story well enough, but it is simply an incredible, it's the first anime movie I can say, maybe after Dead Leaves, that has more in common with something like Into the Spider-Verse than it does typical anime. It's doing animation things that it's clearly pushing boundaries. It's pushing expectations of what you expect from the art form. And that's what I love about animation, because I really don't like a lot of animated movies that do these things where they're attempting for some level of hyper reality, because I'm like, well, then just make it live action. Like, animation allows you this unlimited freedom to do things that live action can never do. And Promare does that almost in every sequence. Now, it is overload. I will admit that. There is an extremeness to it, especially right out the gate during its first action scene, that I can see being just like frying people's brains. It almost fried mine, to be honest. I was like, this is like...
You're making this sound like take the Promare challenge. Like, seems
well,
like, okay, well, now I have to.
Well, I don't know if you'll necessarily jive with it from a story level, because even as a story, because here's the thing, it still has tropes about anime that are part of the reason I never got so, dove into the deep end of anime, because there's tropes about it that I just never click with in the way that others do. And those are there in Promare. They're not deal breakers by any means, but they're there. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. This is anime. But at the same time, it is still just like, wow, I am incredibly impressed that there are still things being done with this particular art form, anime, that are surprising me and that are pushing animation in general forward into just insane formalist tendencies that you can't do in live action anymore, really, and get in front of a wide audience. There has been such a push towards the realism side of filmmaking, that as far as live action goes, that animation is kind of the last refuge for really interesting formalist ideas, which is kind of the filmmaking that interests me more.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing something like Promare, where it's like, this is just a formalist explosion. It's super impressive, and it was super engaging. It's still an anime, though, and in that sense, I was still like, yeah, I'm not going to 100% click with this, because it's just doing this anime stuff that is part and parcel with the genre, or the art form, rather. But I cannot deny the insanity and the extremeness of where the animation goes throughout the movie. It's just whatever the most extreme thing is they can do for a sequence, they do it, and then they go beyond that.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll certainly look up more info on it. I don't know if I'll watch it, but
I would say just watch, a clip, or I don't know. I haven't seen a trailer, so I can't speak to how well the trailer presents itself. But I would say look up some of that. I would say, honestly, watch Dead Leaves first, because it's less than an hour long. And you're like, if I can vibe with this, Promare, it's bigger because it's also a full-length feature. It's, I think, about 100 minutes or something.
Okay.
But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and recommend it to anybody out there who might be considering it. But let's close things out with our
Comment of the Week.
This week's comment of the week is going to DT Grizzler. Speaking about true lies, DT Grizzler says, "What the hell are true lies? Lies that are actually the truth? The lies in this movie all seem to be pretty untrue. Or is it that compared to other lies, these lies are really truly lies? Whatever. as DT Chrysler says. I wanted to talk about it, but I forgot to write it in my notes. The title is nothing. It is just pure oxymoronic gibberish.
It is. It's Arnold, very few syllables, and his head is really big on the poster. That was really what you used to get people to show up to a movie in that time period.
That's all you needed. But that I really like. These are really truly lies.
Yeah.
Good job. You gave us a laugh, DT Grizzler, and thank you to all the comments and shelf picks as always every week. Just always wonderful seeing that from y'all every week. But we will continue Alien Invasion Month next week with not a versus episode, but a double feature. We're doing Body Snatchers, the Abel Ferrara version, and The Puppet Masters. These are two 90s alien invasion movies that we're going to check out. We're not going to versus them, but I think because they're both literary adaptations, it's going to be interesting to compare them and to see what exactly was going on with 90s paranoia and how is the metaphor of alien invasion playing into that. So very stoked to check those out. We hope you will be too next week. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision, featuring special guest Racho Randy Ravage. Wow. That's the hardest I've laughed in the podcast maybe ever.
Maybe.
It was just because it's stupid, yeah.
It's that or our Patreon episode of April currently consuming.
Oh, right, yeah, where we were laughing our asses off about the fucking robot in Rocky IV. Anyway, if you want to hear that, patreon.com/genrevision.
Genrevision. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.